A notorious Ottawa chronic protester was found guilty for causing a disturbance and breaching bail conditions.
A senior economist at the Bank of Montreal is blasting Carney over deficit spending and his government lack of transparency.
Canada's job market saw growth for the first time in 5 months, but students are being left behind. Hello Canada, it's Monday, July 14th, and this is the True North Daily Brief. I'm Isaac Lamoureux.
And I'm Walid Tamtam.
We've got you covered with all the news you need to know. Let's discuss the top stories of the day and the True North exclusives you won't hear anywhere else. A woman who has become notorious in Ottawa for her erratic and sometimes violent behavior at political protests has been found guilty of causing a disturbance and breaching bail conditions on Wednesday. According to court records, Deanna Sharief is accused of assaulting a police officer, assault with a weapon, hate-motivated harassment, intimidation, and obstructing a peace officer, all of which will be addressed at her upcoming trial in early 2026. Months earlier, Sharief had been denied bail related to 8 offenses, including obstructing a police officer, 2 counts of assault with a weapon, possession of a weapon dangerous to the public, intimidation, and 2 counts of hate-motivated harassment. Sharief arrived at Ottawa's Ontario Court of Justice on Wednesday, wearing a keffiyeh-patterned caftan dress and a keffiyeh headband, according to Karima Saad, a lawyer and journalist who has been following Sharief's journey through the criminal justice system. The most recent leg in Sharief's journey through Ontario's criminal justice system began when she entered in Confederation Park in August 2024 for using a noise device at a protest, despite bail conditions restricting her of such devices. She was out on bail for those charges, under conditions prohibiting the use of sound devices when she was arrested again in August. The more recent incident from August, including her interactions with police and her use of a noise device, was streamed live on social media. A video of the incident was later used as evidence in court. So, Walid, what else do we know about Deanna Sharief? What makes her so notorious around the Ontario protest circuit?
Well, Isaac, what's important to understand about Sharief is that she's not just limited to Ottawa. She's shown up at protests in all across Ontario and Toronto, Hamilton, and always with the same mix of provocation and performance. What makes her stand out is that she intentionally blurs the line between activism and antagonism. She doesn't just attend protests, she seeks the confrontations, and she documents every second of it for her online following. And that's the thing about her. The online presence is a big part of her story. She's managed to raise almost $9,000 on gogetfunding.com since her April 27th arrest and denied bail in Ottawa recently. Her fundraising of around $9,000 Canadian, that's actually $8,999 on gogetfunding.com. She's very active on social media and she's framing her issues as political persecution for her pro-Palestine and pro-trans views as she's been frequenting pro-Palestinian and pro-trans protests for a very long time. Behind the scenes, some activists who go to those protests have actually distanced themselves from her. There's sometimes tension because of the fact that she always escalates situations. Some people, some of her supporters, see her as bold. Others worry that she undermines the broader movements that she's a part of. So she's not just notorious for what she's done legally, but really what she is at right now is she's basically hijacked attention and essentially alienated everyone, both people who are supportive and not so supportive of the protests and movements she's a part of. A senior economist at the Bank of Montreal has joined the growing chorus of frustration with Prime Minister Mark Carney's lack of transparency with public finances and his government's failure to table an annual budget despite increasing public spending substantially. Robert Kavcic, senior economist at BMO, wrote a piece commenting on Canada's budget black box and what's the state of the federal government's finances likely look like. Canada's fiscal picture is getting cloudy given that current government did not table a post-election budget and the cost of platform has been rearranged by the evolving economic outlook and shifting policy priorities. Kavcic says that given the evolving nature of Canada's trade conflict with the United States and the country's overall economic outlook, the Parliamentary Budget Officer and the Liberal Party platform have likely underestimated how large the budget deficit will be. Kavcic said, quote, all told, it wouldn't be surprising to see the federal deficit jump toward $80 billion, or about 2.5% of GDP, versus $48 billion at last estimated for the current fiscal year. Kavcic points to Canada's weaker economy and tax cuts that will lead to the budget deficit growing beyond initial projections. Kavcic says the Carney government will add approximately $8 billion to the budget deficit with its current commitment to increase defending spending to 2% of GDP in fiscal year 2025-26. What other criticisms are being laid at the feet of Carney in regards to his lack of budget and financial management of Canada?
Yeah, Walid. So Prime Minister Mark Carney is facing growing criticism over his handling of Canada's public finances. For example, Conservative MP Michael Cooper recently accused him of using accounting tricks to hide the true size of the deficit. Just last Wednesday, Cooper said, quote, Carney has no real plan to reduce spending, no real plan to balance the budget. Carney's real plan is to rack up more debt than Justin Trudeau, while making it more difficult to track government spending. Let's call this for what it is. It's called budget trickery. It's called cooking the books. These are some serious claims, especially considering that during former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's tenure, he doubled the country's debt. When he took office, Canada's debt stood at $616 billion, and it reached $1.215 trillion on August 30th, 2024. So, one of the main concerns about Carney is that he has yet to table a formal budget despite dramatically increasing spending. Canadian Taxpayers Federation Federal Director Franco Terrazzano reminded Canadians that a budget was tabled during the Great Depression, World War II, and so on. So Carney really has no excuse. One of the main concerns is Carney's proposal to split the federal budget into two parts, operating and capital, which economists and opposition MPs say create the illusion of a balanced budget while still running massive deficits and allows Carney to hide and allows Carney to shift and hide spending through the capital budget. For example, Cooper said, quote, in other words, Carney's definition of capital spending includes government handouts, corporate welfare, no doubt to benefit liberal insiders. The C.D. Howe Institute also slammed the idea, warning that dividing the budget this way doesn't change the fact that Canada is heading towards a $92 billion deficit next year and potentially $350 billion in cumulative deficits over the next 4 years. Meanwhile, Carney's government is asking departments to find sweeping cuts of up to 15%, prompting warnings from the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives that this would lead to unprecedented job losses and deep reductions in public services. So all of this has raised questions about transparency, fiscal credibility, and whether Carney is being honest with Canadians about the country's economic future. Canada's job market saw growth for the first time in 5 months in June. However, the vast majority of new jobs were part-time positions. Statistics Canada's labor force survey was released Friday morning and highlighted that 70,000 of the 83,000 new jobs in June were for part-time work. The unemployment rate went down slightly, reaching 6.9%, which remains the second highest rate in the G7 behind only France, which posted a 7.1% rate in May. Among the provinces, Alberta led the way in job growth, adding 30,000 jobs. However, unlike the national trend, nearly all of them were full-time positions. Alberta's unemployment rate fell 0.6 percentage points to 6.8%, while Ontario's remained unchanged at 7.8%. Ontario saw some of the worst job growth in the nation. The province's poor employment growth was partially due to a job market crisis in Windsor, where the unemployment rate climbed to 11.2%. Ongoing layoffs in the automotive sector due to U.S. tariffs has negatively affected Ontario's job market, primarily in Windsor and Oshawa, home to the province's car part manufacturing industry. Canadian students who are struggling with unprecedented unemployment saw no relief in June. The unemployment rate for students aged 15 to 24 rose to 17.4%, up from last year, which was at 15.8%. So, Walid, what sort of impact can be expected with a 17.4% unemployment rate among students? What effect could that have on the Canadian economy in the long run?
Yeah, Isaac, the 17.4% unemployment rate among students is a big, big red flag. And what makes it especially concerning is that this isn't just a temporary blip. This is now the highest June rate we've seen since the end of the Great Recession in 2009, if you exclude the pandemic years. So what does that mean long term? Well, When students can't get summer or part-time work, it slows down their early career development. They're missing out on experiences, on income, on building up the resume that gets them the jobs they're looking for in the future, or support them in paying off their student loans. And it's not just bad for the students. Economically, if young people aren't earning, they're not spending. That hits consumer demand, especially in sectors like retail, hospitality, and the service industry, the very industries where students also work. It also delays things like moving out, buying a car, or paying off debt. Another stat from the report that ties into this, more than 1 in 5 unemployed Canadians in June had been looking for work for over 6 months. A clear sign that in Canada, long-term unemployment is becoming more entrenched. So this student job crisis could bleed into broader youth underdevelopment, especially if this group enters the workforce with less experience and more financial strain. Now, this is probably why back in March we saw an Abacus poll highlighting a stark generational divide between young Canadians under age 30 and seniors when it comes to priorities in the April election. For Canadian youth, affordability issues were the overwhelming concern, with 47% citing costs of living as a top concern, while 28% stress housing affordability. The truth is, if youth are moving towards conservatives, probably something to do with the tough summers that students have been facing in recent years. We're looking at the risk of an entire generation falling behind economically in Canada, which could weigh down on our labor force and productivity for years to come.
That's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. You can stay on top of new episodes every weekday by subscribing to the Daily Brief on iTunes and Spotify. Also, while you're at it, make sure to hit us with a 5-star rating and please leave a review.